how are you?
We're good.
It's good to see you all. Can we give a round of applause again for this amazing... My name is Kerry, and for this particular production at Blue Barn, I have the honor. I directed the staged reading of this play with Dave and at Great Plains Theater Commons last year, and so it's been a year-long journey, and now Ellen has joined our journey, who's our director. So if we can hear it for Ellen McCloy. Our actors will be joining us in just a moment. They're taking a breath back there, as you can imagine. It's a little bit of an intense show. There's a lot going on. So you may have questions of your own. Please be thinking of what you want to ask the director and the playwright and the actors here tonight. So great to have you both in town, Dave and Ellen, because they're here from New Jersey and New York, and they'll be taking off this weekend. But I have a couple of questions to start off with. And at any time, please feel free to jump in, because this is a conversation, right? It's not a lecture or a study, it's a conversation. So,
or a 15-minute monologue.
Or a 15-minute monologue! And on this production, I didn't even finish my sentence, I'm so bad about that. On this particular production, I had the honor of being able to be an associate intimacy director, and we can talk a little bit more, and we will, about that in these questions. But the what we call an advocacy captain is the title we came up with. It's a new position about care. So when we look at comprehensive care in representing equitably people across the spectrum of life, care for our actors, our crew, our community, and our audience. So we're kind of making it up as we go along in that area, but I think making it up well, because it's Blue Barn, right? And that's why you're all here. So my first question, starting with the playwright, Dave, if I can. You create in all of your works massive opportunities to have representation of autism, neurodiversity, and other impairments and disabilities as experienced by humans. And can you talk about the passion you have for that, and what is special about this particular play?
Yeah, you know, I didn't start writing plays with the intention to write autistic characters specifically, even though I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 3 or 4. I was kind of like, I'm just gonna write what makes me uncomfortable and help other people like it. And I wrote, I think the first play I wrote that had an autistic character was a play called Light Switch, and I wrote it because I live at the intersection of queerness and autistic, and I had never seen that, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just have to create that then. And then I realized that I just had so much more to say about neurodiversity, and I think what's so special about More of a Heart is that parent-child relationships appear in, I think, in pretty much most of my work, but I think with this play, so much of it is about narrative, because in my narrative, my parents, my parents don't even see me as autistic anymore, and I don't think they have for a while, and I'm kind of like, well, I still have a lot of questions about my identity and about my autism and how it manifests in the world, and what does my narrative, when I take charge of it, look like, because I used to kind of view my story as an overcoming narrative, and now I'm like, that is not true. That was not, and I think like this play was really my way, all my work is kind of a way of me expressing that. But with this play, I think I really got to examine the side of the autism parent and have like an opportunity to create a character who is often like reduced to like a stereotype in a way, and ask her, you know, how is this really flawed person human? Because I really feel that the history of autism is people with really great intentions and really big egos who go into it meaning to do well, and then basically becoming the villain. And who knows, maybe I'll become the villain eventually. I don't know. To be determined. I'd rather be the anti-hero like Taylor Swift is.
Taylor Swift.
But I think that focus on narrative and creating flawed characters whom I wouldn't necessarily have lunch with was, I think, what I think is so special about this play.
And bringing that story forward through characters, different characters that you want to explore, what their perspectives might be. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, and also like allowing the audience who may not know much about autism to be like, oh yeah, I've heard this parent story, I relate to it, and then realizing, oh wait, there's a person behind that. How have I not thought of this before? And then just, you're here? All right, you got a whole journey to go, you got a whole play to watch. Come join us.
Yeah, excellent. So I also want to welcome Ben Pearson to the stage, who played Ben in our play. And Ben also, so I'll come back to this, so think about this for a second. And here comes Abs Cameron, who played Rachel. Ben and Rachel were both involved with the reading, the GPTC last year, and Abs played Rachel. At that point, Ben played Zachary, and now in this production played Ben. So interesting to get that perspective. So welcome, and we can give them another round of applause. So I've got a question to bring back to both of you, but wanted to touch base with Alan. Alan and Dave work together quite a bit. So my question for Alan is, you often work with Dave. What about this work really drew you to, and I forgot to mention at the top of this is the world premiere of this play, fully so it's a very exciting opportunity for Blue Barn. It's an exciting opportunity for Omaha, and an exciting opportunity for Dave, and for really, like we said, this is a play that really becomes a form of social justice in our world as well. So, I'd love to hear some thoughts, Alan. We've spent a good deal of time with you, but to hear your thoughts and share them about what about this piece draws you.
Oh man. I mean, so Dave introduced me to this piece maybe 2 years ago, and I got to see a reading they were doing of it. It was over Zoom. It was, what, 2022, 2021?
It was 2022.
2022. And the first thing that drew me to it was the emotional reaction I had, which was teary. I was weeping at my computer screen. But what really draws me to this play, and frankly to all of Dave's work, is what we were talking about earlier, is the characters. There are so many plays out there that I see a lot of theater, and so much of it feels written for me. And I want nothing to do with theater that I feel is, no, seriously, the worst possible thing that I think can happen is you go into a theater and you sit through a play and you're like, oh yeah, I agree with that. Or like, oh yeah, I like that. Like, it's a play that, Dave's work is challenging. Dave's work is challenging not just in addressing issues that you don't often see tackled in general, let alone in the American theater, but challenging on a core level, not in the sense of having one's identity attacked or your benevolence or your goodwill attacked, but in asking you, or at least inviting you, to reconsider your notions about what you think you know of the world. And that was what was so impactful about this, and all of the plays that I've worked on with Dave is, and by all means, this play was not written as something for people to learn from. That is not the goal, but I also think that is something that happens when many people see this play. And and I know in my life, I am lucky to know and be friends with a lot of autistic people. And also, frankly, just being able to see some of my friends and the people I know and a lot of artists I respect having their story represented on stage in a way where they are not secondary to somebody else's story, but the central point of the narrative. In this play in particular, I'm drawn to also because it's a mother-son story. I'm a sucker for a good tearjerker. The play that radicalized me into the theater, or at least into continuing with the theater, was Seeing Next to Normal in 2009 when I was applying to college. And seeing the relationship between mothers and children and parents and children tested, and giving hope that even in challenging situations you can find that beating heart and find the core and find the love between people who are at disparate ends of an ideology or of even a conversation, that's catnip to me. So for all of those reasons, as soon as I saw this play, I knew I needed, I told David, like, you have to let me direct this, and I feel very lucky that he did.
Well, we're lucky to have you. And to have
thank you.
both of you. So I'm going to throw this over to the actors, if you do not mind. And then once we hear from them on this next question, I'd like to open it up to questions you might have or things you'd like to hear more about. And then we've got some other questions we can play. We can just play. We're just here to play. We've got a half hour to play. Or now probably like, I don't know, 20 minutes? Yeah. So a question for all three of these actors, and of course we've met Abs, we've met Ben, this is Matthew, if we can give him a huge round of applause. It is crucial when creating characters experiencing impairment and disability and/or that representation of these characters be authentic. And what do we mean by authentic representation? And one way I've heard that defined is that people playing characters with an impairment or disability should have the similar impairment disability or something close to that. Now, that is one way of defining authentic. I think also, and I'd like to, if I can tout something, and I'm not going to quote this verbatim because I don't have it memorized, but in Dave's play, he's very specific about, I would really like Zachary and Ben to be played by people who are autistic, and if not, then I would like people, if you're going to have to cast that way, because then I don't want to speak for you, but I think the importance of the story being told is as important as trying to cast authentically, right? And not to ask anyone to have to disclose where they're at in their lives, because we would never do that. But when playing characters who are experiencing, like Zachary, like Ben, and then also we may have cast members who are experiencing a place on that spectrum as well. Maybe their character isn't, but that's what they're bringing to this character. Can we talk a little bit about how do we ensure that what we're doing is authentic, right? What are some things we did in the rehearsal process? Or what are some things when you read this play and decided to audition for this play, and were like, if I get this role, this is where I want to go with this? What were things that were important to you as an actor to bring to the representation of these beautifully crafted characters? And so whoever wants to go first, and if you need a second to think about that, totally cool.
I think a lot of it started on the very first day when we were doing table work, having necessary conversations, really breaking down the script, and exploring the why, exploring our own experiences and how we could apply them, even if it's not necessarily exactly what happens in the script. Still, how we can bring those moments in to draw from. Personally, as a neurodivergent, I like to call it neurospicy individual. I think that, I mean, me in my everyday life, I just have little quirky things that I do, physically, verbally, and never in the process was that turned down. It was always embraced, which you don't always see. Sometimes you play characters that are a bit more neurotypical, and you have to suppress those things. So being a part of this world, this play, and having all of those beautiful things embraced was magical.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Ben or Matt? Ben, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge when I was offered the part of Ben was I was really worried that he would come off like a caricature with however I portrayed him. So the best way for me is like, okay, I just gotta find a way to make whatever I'm doing just feel authentic to me. And again, kind of like what Ab said, I definitely thought about, well, what do I do in my life to stim, or what do I do to calm down? And I brought as much of that as I could to the role without trying to be, without overdoing it. Because I've noticed that, whether I want to admit it or not, like I share a lot of similarities with Ben, probably more than I care to admit when I started. Like even his echohalia, like I found that I often repeat things more than I have to, or I ramble to myself for no particular reason other than just it soothes part of my brain. So once I kind of tapped into that, I think it was much easier to play him and make it feel like he was an actual person and not just some goofy character that I was playing. That was always first and foremost. You have to see who he is first. He has to be his real, authentic self.
Thank you for sharing.
For me, what it was just taking a lot of input from the production and from the creatives and people who have those experiences, and as well as so there was that level of it, but then there was also the level of like kind of looking in the mirror in a way. I guess the biggest thing is that while there may be similarities to me and Zachary, that still treating Zachary as like what is placed on the script in terms of like this is how he copes with things. This is what he does to cope with this feeling. This is what he does to cope with that feeling. I mean, when we look at the differences between me and Zachary, it's like I'm an actor, he's not. He wants to go into computer science, he wants to be in computer science. He actually doesn't really, obviously he still wants to make connection, but he doesn't really strive to make connection just to feel at peace with himself. And to keep that in mind, and I think that just needs to continue, especially for us actors who resonate with these type of characters, is we need to understand that it is still a different person, and I think it's really important that actors, the actors who are playing these characters have those similarities, because it's almost like so it's like, this is how I cope with this situation. Well, he's feeling the same things, but he copes this way, and just making it so that it's authentic to that portrayal of that character versus, unless it is specifically something that's written with you, all of your traits and qualities. I feel like it's never going to fully align, and so as actors we still have to act. So yeah,
that whole acting thing. No, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I seem to remember a conversation about that the actors that bring themselves to this role, if they stem in a different way, if there's something they contribute from the way they do things, they can bring that to this character as well, because I think beautifully written within the context of the play itself is that the characters, there's good meat there for actors to dig into, but it's not so defined that they can't bring themselves to it. And I think that's so important, especially in this play.
And I guess what I'll say to that is, being that this is the first iteration on stage with this, I wanted to make those changes. I wanted to be like, okay, well, this is how I cope with this, but this is what Zachary is on the page. And I really wanted to bring what was on the page in Dave's words to life in the way that is intended. So, but granted, there absolutely could be future iterations where there are beautiful different versions of Zachary, and I think this play is just so amazing in the sense that it really just resonates with us. For people that struggle with similar things, it really resonates with us, and it's such a beautiful piece.
Yeah,
So
for sure. And I think that I don't know, I think that would be one of the hardest things being a playwright, is you just have to let all the words go and let people take it where they take it. And I don't know how you sleep sometimes. Like seriously, you know, I think it's a tall order, you know. So we've talked quite a bit, great conversation, and thank you so much, everyone, for what we've contributed so far. Do you have questions that you would, yeah?
Matt, you were fantastic
Oh.
as a public school teacher, and knowing somewhat about autism and working with autism students. I'm amazed at how you captured so much of what we typically, stereotypically apply to autistic people who have autism that are, I mean, your gestures, your movements, your face, I mean, you just captured it beautifully. Did that come from your personal experience, or was a lot of it you plus great direction from your director?
I guess I'll disclose it since you know you're bringing up the question. Zachary and I have a lot of similarities. Granted, they're not the same. Like again, I'll say, I'm an actor.
Right.
I'm going for acting. I'm going for theater. I want to become these characters and whatever character in the future. And I honestly, with that profession, you know, you're going for human connection. You're studying human connection and what it means to be human. And then again, that's not necessarily the case for Zachary in terms of his profession or what he wants to go for. But we also we had similar experiences where we were kind of spoken over to and with. But I did not do ABA. My version was the whole that there was a refusal to ever get me diagnosed. So it's still hard to, you know, grasp with the identity. And I think what's captured beautifully in Dave's ending, honestly, is that there isn't an answer. There really isn't an answer, and it leaves room for beautiful discussion. And I think that, you know, this play, what an honor to do it, because it is, I'm gonna credit Abs on this, it's so much bigger than us.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
If I might add a second to that, because I want to also give Matthew a tremendous amount of credit for bringing his personal experience to it, but also B, there's a tremendous amount of choreography that does not look like choreography going on in this play that Matthew makes look like acting.
It's amazing.
Whether that's, you know, we set moments, it was good. Okay, then you're putting on a mask because your mom doesn't believe you. It was good, you put a tone on. Whether that's, you know, though anytime there's a sensory moment, that is all, we run an intimacy warm-up before every show in the same way you would run a fight call. For everything from, you know, hitting oneself all the way down to just making certain noises. It's all very choreographed and matched with intention. So the answer, I don't want to speak for Matthew, but I think the answer is both. And, you know, there is always something behind what you are seeing. There's always a reason for it.
And I think that's why, because I know, I don't want to call people out, but I know that I had heard, you know, that, you know, neurotypical people can do a great job with playing autistic characters if they're given the proper direction and input. But I really do think there's something special about casting neurotypical, or not neurotypical, neurodivergent people in these roles, because they're able to find authentically the lines in between that just feel so real.
Well, it's the Stanislavski method to apply what you know to what you're playing.
Yeah.
And the irony is that I've been told by quite a few organizations who shall remain nameless that we don't know any autistic actors, so we don't know how we can support you. And yet, in every project Alan and I have done together, and even projects I've done like without Alan, finding autistic actors has consistently been the easiest part of casting. So, American theater, try harder.
Yeah. I mean, right?
It's not that hard.
And here's the thing, is like, you know, and there's, and not to pull out a bunch of data, but, you know, 1 in 4 people, but I'm gonna pull out some data, right? So there are 1 in 4 people on stage may be represented as having a disability, but 1 in 4 actors with a disability are not playing those characters. And so it's a, you know, and this is a huge shout out to Blue Barn, right? Evoke thought, emotion, action, and change. And I hope I'm quoting that correctly. And so there was so that brings us to something that I think is revolutionary with this production is the attention on care, right? And we talked about this from the very beginning. Susan and I sat down and we talked with David and Ellen, we talked with the cast, is that when we look at care, it's not just, it's care comprehensively. Right? So we look at care for the actors, care for the crew, care for the audience, care for the community. And that when we're looking at producing shows that are actively trying to provide what we call an affordance so that people can create their own accommodations so that they can feel safe to take risks and to be able to tell these stories, right? And that in order to do that, you really have to create, and it has to be intentional from the get-go, an area where people can truly contribute who they are and feel, it, you know, safe space gets tricky, right? Equitable space, not so much. It's important. When I say not so much, I don't mean it's so easy to create an equitable space. That is not true. Right? But you have to first provide the platform for people to be able to bring themselves to the table, right?
Yes.
And I do want us, if people are willing to share some of the things we did in the essence of like trying to, you know, like, and again, no judgment of how anyone else does things, but there are sensory friendly performances, but the goal was to make every performance here as equitable and accessible as possible, right? And so we can share a little bit of that, but I also don't, you know, I'm a talker. So I want to make sure if there are other questions out there that people wanted to ask before we, you have another question or?
I wanted to ask Dave, when you went through your process of writing this piece, how much rewriting do you actually do from the beginning stages to readings, first initial readings, you hear your work and then you must analyze it carefully because dialogue is so important. How difficult was that for you with this particular script and these characters?
I revise an F ton. You know, I consider myself a better rewriter than writer. The first draft of More of a Heart was very long, very overwritten, very cerebral, very early on. And I think I had the realization that anything in this play that is not directly about Mary Ellen and Zachary, get rid of it. And I also really want to give a shout out to my dramaturg on the Great Plains Theater Commons reading last year, Ji-Hae Kim, who is a brilliant dramaturg. And something that I struggled with in the writing of it was the depiction of ALS, because I admittedly don't have as much knowledge about that. And earlier drafts, I think, it felt like a plot device more than something that was integral to the characters. So something that Ji-Hae and I talked about while we were doing like preliminary readings of the play before the conference was a very less is more approach to that. which also looked into the timeline of what it would like to actually get an ALS diagnosis. And the it used to be that you found out when Mary Ellen found out that she had ALS, but now you find out when Zachary finds out Mary Ellen had ALS, which I think also honed in the narrative focus of the piece. And that very long monologue at the beginning used to be longer, if you can believe it. Yeah, that's how much rewriting I did with this. Like the bones and general structure of the story were there. It was just the execution that was re-evaluated and redone I mean, even with this process, I didn't make any like major script changes or cuts, but I made tweaks, and there were some aspects that we found during rehearsal that really made a scene click. I think for the big fight between Mary Ellen and Zachary, like we discovered something about Zachary's meltdown in that scene, that he is fighting through it, and I'm going to rewrite the stage directions to really kind of communicate that more, because that I think really unlocked the scene for us in a lot of ways.
That was my final question. From doing this, did you find things you wanted to change? You already answered that.
Yeah.
And the credit goes to Alan and
I'll take partial credit for that one.
it was a team effort amongst the creatives to
It really-
come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
It really
It
was.
really was.
We came to that
It's easy to
conclusion
pick things
very,
on that
very
specific.
later in the process, but that's the beautiful thing about doing a new work. Is like, oh, we're gonna
Yes.
discover this.
Yeah, and I think a huge shout out to Kate Bussell, who was our intimacy
Yes.
director that
Yes.
helped with all of that choreography and helped us come to those realizations. And also, this was somebody who I just spoke with who actually had conversations with us at GPTC last year, Samuel Gates, who is a disability consultant. So through those conversations, you see this team up here, the team is all of Blue Bar, and the team is how many times you've worked on this play, the team is what we did at GPTC, right? That it's a big team. It's astounding how many people it takes to write a really good play,
And it's amazing how many lives need to intersect for theater to happen at all.
Yeah, for sure. Question.
For those who have been experiencing autism for decades now, have you noticed a shift in the culture? So I'm in the medical community, and there's more of a shift in recognizing spectrum. And has that helped? Has that hurt? Has that made a difference in cultural acceptance? What has been your experience over the past few decades as the medical community and the verbiage has started to be more?
Oh, that's such a great question.
Well, something that I'm trying to move us away from is using the term spectrum. I prefer the term constellations, because constellations has innumerable manifestations and stories behind them, as does autism. I think the way that spectrum was originally intended is very similar to what constellations was, because Lorna Wing, who did so much work to expand the diagnostic criteria of autism, like she used the term spectrum, and I don't think she was necessarily the first to land on that conclusion, but she recognized that there were so many manifestations of it. But then I think it kind of got, I don't know if co-opted is the right word, but then, functioning labels got added to it, and then this very capitalist perspective was added to it in terms of like, is a disabled person's value to society what they can contribute to it, rather than society serving their needs. I think that's why I've stopped using functioning labels. I use needs-based labels, high needs, medium needs, low needs. I think there is a more specific there's a more yeah.
Level 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, and I think the discourse has gotten better at representing autistic voices. I still think we have a way to go, as we always do. I just wonder oftentimes if an holistic society is really ready to hear us, because that they're going to have to confront decades of misunderstanding and abuse and systemic wrongs and a lot of stuff, and that is gonna be I feel like we were barely able, I think, to handle the racial reckoning that happened in 2020, so I don't know, which obviously goes like way further back, but like, I don't know like if we're ready to have that recognition of how we've treated like specifically autistic people in society, so that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think it would, in order, if you don't mind, I think there's a long way to go, and I think that when that happens, it will signal a shift towards recognition too of disabled people in general.
Yep.
And the marginalization that the disabled face. I think that, it was very interesting working on this process from that perspective as well. One of the big questions, we did an event maybe 2.5 weeks ago at UNO, and one of the people, there was a conversation about youth talking about disabled people in terms of value they can bring to companies. Oh look, Microsoft has a whole team of autistic people because they're so valuable. And then somebody is like, I really wish you would just like, can we just like acknowledge that autistic people are human? Right?
Yes.
Can we just have inherent value there? And I think that so much of the way that many disabilities are treated and many disabled people are treated is like, oh well, they need to stay at home, so they don't have value. I mean, the most recent discourse I can think of is about DoorDash and about is this way too in the weeds? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
No.
There's a whole discourse now about, oh well, you can't make a microwave meal on your own. Your needs mean that you're not able to do that, so you need long-term care. You need to be. It's really bad. There's this idea that if you are not able to do basic tasks, that you don't deserve to exist. And I think that if you are to have the type of reckoning that you're talking about, that's what's really at the core of it.
Yep, and that's why we loop back around and say it's not just a play, it's an act of social justice, right? In that it's about recognizing that we are all human, we are all valuable, we all have a place in society, and that place is intrinsic to who we are as people, right? And so I think we could go, like, let's have a sleepover. Really dig into all this. But I know we're kind of at the end of our time for tonight. But I would say, that's the really exciting thing. I mean, there's so many exciting things, is that these conversations are happening. These are great questions.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that this play is not designed to teach, it's a springboard to have these conversations. So continue to have them and take them home and talk to your friends about them and dig into it deeper, because there is so much. And really it's about equitable living, right? It's about equitable living. And there's value all the way throughout. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I'm sorry, what?
No, it's on.
Are you sure?
I guess I was just gonna round back to something that you had talked about earlier about like what this production did for care in terms of like, us actors. So I guess for me, like, theater is like my safe place in a way. Not saying it's a safe space, but like safe place, because like it's what I love to do. For me, it was like emotional regulation, and so I was given that time and space to have the feelings and sort through them, no matter how winded they got, and I'm very sorry. But like that just felt very refreshing that I could feel how I was feeling about certain things. So.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah, and it's great to hear that.
It is good to hear that.
Yeah, and that's where, that's the beginning, and that's a great place a trajectory to follow, right?
Don't let other
So-
theaters tell you it's not possible.
Correct, that is correct. So I want to thank all of our panelists, and I want to thank you all. Can we give ourselves a round of applause? And yeah, please come back, see it again. You'll have more light bulbs go up, and bring your friends. So thank you so much, y'all, and have a very, very good night. Thank you for coming.